Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Dentzel Domain on Red State Talk Radio. I am your host, Ed Dentzel. Come to the microphone today a little more tired than I usually am. Probably going to notice it in my voice, maybe in my demeanor. I spent the last 2 days out in the hot sun of Daytona Beach playing my first disc golf tournament in 6 months. Overall, didn't play great, didn't play bad. It showed that I hadn't played competitively for about 6 months at least. Technically, I have not played competitively for about 10 months, technically. I played one tournament in January where I really didn't prepare that much. But it was hot. Everybody was suffering. Nobody fainted. Nobody had a heat stroke or anything, but it was just a little miserable out there. In fact, I think my greatest achievement this past weekend was not getting sunburned. Put on the suntan lotion. Now, the backs of my legs, like down by my calves, got a little burnt, but nothing really. I mean, nothing where today I'm like, man, I can't do that. I can't touch this. I can't touch that. Nothing like that. So that's a real positive. And really came through it okay, but today I'm feeling it. This is not a usual Monday for me. But just a preparation. I'm going to be playing a bigger tournament. The biggest tournament that they have in Florida, at least for amateurs every year, is on Labor Day weekend in Orlando. And this was really just a tune-up for that. I wanted to see where my game was compared to others. And I'm probably okay, but when you don't play for a while, you feel the stress of competition more than if you're competing like every few weeks or every 3 weeks that I used to do mainly like the first half of 2015, where I was playing a tournament almost every other week, and you get used to that tournament stress. Well, you get away from that, and then you get back in. It all comes back. You start worrying about your shots and where discs are going to go. And you get a little bit of the yips, and I did have some throws where I just did not know where the disc was going. But given all that, not totally dismayed on how I played, but I know what I need to work on now. And it was good to see a bunch of guys that I used to see a lot more often. And it was a beautiful area we were playing. The guys in Daytona Beach that run that club, that run the tournament, did a great job, and I give all the credit in the world to them. And it is the hardest tournament of the year because it's played in July. It's the only major tournament in Florida that's held during July because it's so hot. That's what makes that tournament so unique. On another note, when you're standing around, and I'll get to the politics eventually, but I think this is interesting. I always like to give a little insight what's going on in my world besides just the politics. Is that when people find out, new guys, played with a lot of new guys this weekend as well. A lot of guys I've played with before and then some new guys. And they find out that you do a show, and I don't mention this political show because I don't like to talk politics out on this golf course. It's not appropriate. I don't want to get into it. I don't want to, do groupthink with a bunch of conservatives in my group, and I don't want to oppose other people in my group for 18 holes either if they're a bunch of liberals. I just want to play. But with my other show, America's Missing Podcast, being that it's a little less divisive. I did mention that I do that show, and they'll probably find out that I do this show too, and that's fine. But it's interesting. They start thinking that they're around like some radio personality or something like that, which of course isn't the case. But that show, America's Missing Podcast, is doing very well. We were, 111th in the news and politics category on iTunes this weekend in the world. 111th in the world in news and politics. Yes, you should be listening to that show too. So I tell them about that stuff. Everybody else has, regular jobs, engineer, teacher, computer programmer, IT guy, something like that. And here I am doing shows and working in entertainment and writing books and things like that. So that's always interesting. You know, I think maybe I'm like the first guy that they run into in disc golf world that that's what I do when I'm not in the disc golf course. So there's that. So I think I got some people to subscribe to the shows. So that'll be nice. Well, as you know, on Friday, I did not do a live show. I'm not sure what show Red State Talk Radio played on Friday night, but it would so happen. And how many times does this happen that I do my show and then I record it, and then right after I record it, something big happens. And last Thursday, I'd done my show before this shooting in Dallas occurred. And I was watching it happen just like all of you were, and wondering what was going on, and now we know, looking back at Thursday, and it seems like, given that I was out in the disc golf for 2 days straight, from 9:30 in the morning to about 5:30, 16 hours in the sun, it made this weekend feel like about a week long. So it's only 4 days ago, but it feels like 2 weeks ago to me. And it's amazing now you look back at it that how much they got wrong. The news. They were trying. You can go back if anybody has. Can you DVR back that far? I don't know. But they can talk about, these shooters were triangulating their fire, and there was 4 of them, and they're in these different buildings, and one of them was shot, the other ones are on the loose, and then after all these days later, it was just one guy. And it's all horrible, and we're going to get into the specifics of it. But it is amazing how much news these days people don't get right. Now, there will be those conspiracy theorists out there who will say, well, there are more shooters, and the government's covering it up. And it's a black flag. That you can always guarantee that. If something like this happens, some idiot on YouTube or some blog somewhere, within 10 minutes, maybe the Alex Jones crowd, within minutes, they're going to come out, this is a black flag operation. I got sources within the government telling me that's a black flag operation. Oh, that just wears me out. It just wears me out. So on one hand, these conspiracy people hate the media, but then on the other hand, they're believing the media when it says that there was 4, but now the media says there were 4 shooters, and now there's only 1 shooter, and now these conspiracy people are saying, oh, no, the media was right the first time around. Meanwhile, the rest of the year, they're telling us how the media is just nothing but a bunch of liars. I wish these kooks could get it all straight. I guess you could say the same thing about Orlando. There was like 2 or 3 shooters. Once again, ended up only being 1 guy. San Bernardino, I don't particularly remember. I don't know if there was as big a mistake in that. At that point, they didn't know one of the shooters was a woman. That might have been part of it, but I don't remember them getting the numbers wrong as how many terrorists there were back then. But they certainly got this Dallas shooting wrong. And it just shows you that when you rush to report something just because you want to be first, you don't get it right. And all it does is get more people worried. Instead of them just saying, we don't know how many shooters there were. You just need to stay at home. Wherever you are, don't move, or call 911. If you think you're in a bad place, call 911, and somebody will try to come and get you. But all this stuff about 4 shooters and only capturing 1 and 3 are still on the loose, driving people nuts. It does nobody any favors. Some 3 at that point it could have been terrorists. Who knows? Of course, I was tweeting about it on Thursday night if you were following it, and I had a lot to say about it. I even said, would you be surprised if one of these guys ends up being Muhammad. That's once again at a time when the media was putting out there that there were 4 shooters. Of course, we know there was only one, and his last name was not Muhammad. His first name wasn't Muhammad either. In fact, I don't think he was Muslim at all. And we're not going to say his name on this show. But what we know now 4 days looking back at it, is that this guy was just, once again, just a regular American. And you will find a lot of comments out there about him saying that he was a decent guy and then he went to Afghanistan as part of his unit and got in some trouble over there and somehow got honorably discharged instead of dishonorably discharged. Tried to join some black militant groups. They allegedly rejected him because they found him unstable, which has to be the most darkly humorous news I've heard in a long time, that black militant groups actually do psych profiles before they accept people. That's news to me. And at some point, this guy just kind of turned. And we should take note of this. And in fact, since I've found out that he was an American, and this wasn't necessarily militant Islam terrorism, this is a different kind of terrorism, that, and based on a lie, and we're going to get into that too, that I start to wonder, is this a guy who is suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder? Is this one more ex-soldier who comes home, went there not necessarily a bad person, but came home a different person? And we see that, and you can read about suicide rates and crime rates among people who have come back from Afghanistan and Iraq, and the problems that these people have that they didn't seem to have before they went. And this goes back to what I've said a few times, that the problem we have in the United States is not so much that we can't win wars, it's just we seem to draw them out forever. And we ask men and women to stay in dangerous roles for longer than ever. I want to remind you, World War II was less than 4 years long, at least for the United States. Less than 4 years. Not so with terrorism and drawing it out because we don't want to have these, we substitute one kind of injury for another because the current president, Barack Obama, and even to a certain extent, George W. Bush, so worried about casualties that what happens is when you go light, the war lasts longer. And then that affects, instead of people getting injured physically, they end up getting injured mentally. And then they end up serving out their tour. They come back to the United States, and although on the outside they look perfectly fine and they got to avoid the bullets and the IEDs and the rocket attacks and terrorist attacks over there, on the inside they're hurting. And I'm not to excuse this particular guy, but you can't dismiss the statements from people who knew him, growing up with him, that something happened within the course of a couple years with him over in Afghanistan. He was one person before he went. He came back a different person. Also, it looks like he had been planning this for a while, and that that's what I was thinking back to when it happened. Is I was thinking, how long, in what time frame was this protest, this anti-police protest in Dallas? You could call it that. how long did it take to get organized was a question that kept running through my head on Thursday night as I was watching this. A few days, a week, and then it kept coming out. Well, there were 4 shooters, and I'm trying to think to myself, all right, so the protest gets planned, and then suddenly 4 guys suddenly get together, maybe a woman too. Like, hey, women can shoot guns too and be criminals. They get together, they scope the place out, and they plan it all out, and they execute this plan, for lack of a better term. There was something, I have to admit, as I was sitting there on Thursday, and I was thinking, there's something about this that doesn't seem right. That they found out the protest route, and they scoped out the location. You go here, I'll go there, and then we're going to shoot up some cops. You can look back at it now and say, yeah, that sounds a little shady. Whereas now that we know that it was just one guy, and really they believe now that he had been planning to do something for a long time, and the protest just was the decision that he heard about and said, yep, it's close enough, I can drive there. That's a lot easier to do when it was just one person, in contrast to 4 guys who were just sitting around in a back room or in a cellar somewhere planning something like this out. So there's that as well. But I don't know what else he was going to do. I don't know exactly what he was planning for, but it doesn't sound like this was what he was planning. It just was an opportunity. He didn't know it was going to happen. He was maybe thinking about something else down the road, and then he found out it was going to be this protest. There were going to be a lot of cops there, and this was his chance to kill cops. And he did end up killing 5 of them. And that video that's shown of him, the killer down on the street, the cop comes up behind him, shoots him, the guy turns around and goes at him with, the cop tries to get behind the pillar, and I believe that cop was killed. That it's just, you can only watch that. See, to me, that kind of video is like the 9/11 videos. I can't watch them anymore. It's just too disgusting. It ticks you off so much. To me, I can watch other things. I can watch planes crash by accident. Like Sioux City, Iowa, going back to 1989. That plane hit the runway, blew out the engine on the tail. It was an L-1011 or DC-10, one of the two. Blew out an engine, had to land at Sioux City and hit kind of going fast. I can watch that video over and over and over because I realize it's just an accident. People trying to do the best under the stresses of a mechanical malfunction. But when the issue is something that's deliberate, like September 11th, like this shooting, and even like fictional accounts like Black Hawk Down, that's a movie, as much as I like it, I can only watch it once because it's so disgusting to me what happened in Somalia. That was 1993. It's a movie. Saving Private Ryan, same thing about all the... Even though it's, once again, a fictionalized account, that first 20 minutes of the movie, I guess those things are just a little too much for my senses. But to watch that cop trying to do his job, shooting at a guy, hitting him, but the guy's wearing body armor, and he turns around like he's not even shot. The cop, I'm sure right at that second knew, oh man, I'm in trouble now. And I wonder if there's going to be more videos that come out in time of the other cops getting shot and killed. And what occurred to me, and I haven't read this anywhere, I realized that this guy, the guy had military experience. He knew the cops were going to be staking out this protest route. He gets up in that parking garage, And then I guess he must have come down the parking garage, and that's when he engaged that one particular cop in that video and tried to run away, and they finally cornered him. But I'm wondering if this shooter was hoping that he would start shooting at cops. The cops would think that they were getting shot at by the protesters. Because remember, it was a protest it was an anti-police protest having to do with these shootings that happened in St. Paul and wherever else of white cops killing black men for seemingly no reason. And we don't know what's going to come out in those cases. Of course, the protesters would say that this was going on for a long time. I'm not sure that the statistics say that. But I'm wondering if the shooter was trying to make the cops shoot at the protesters, because the cops wouldn't know where the shots are coming from. They'd just take for granted that it was somebody in the crowd, being that these people were anti-police, that somebody brought a gun and started firing at the police, and the police fire and kill the protesters to create even a bigger scandal than it already exists. That still continues through my mind today. And in fact, I think that might have happened, that could have happened, had it not been for actually some of the protesters noticing that there were sparks going off the ground, and the police noticing that when the bullets were hitting the ground, when the guy was missing shots and they were hitting off the pavement and the sidewalk or any steel structures on the ground, that the sparks were being created, and they thought, hey, this is coming from above. That's probably the only thing that kept the police from possibly shooting some of these protesters, most of these protesters who were unarmed. Probably. So there's that. And in fact, given the chaos that was going down, watching those homemade videos, people with their phones, it's always amazing to me that there's bullets flying and people were pulling out their phones to film it. Right there in the action, I could see from a block away or up in a skyscraper somewhere where you kind of feel safe, but down there on the ground and bullets are flying all over the place and somebody goes for their phone. But it was complete chaos, and it is a miracle that those cops didn't end up shooting some of the protesters just in the mayhem, because they were afraid too. It is a miracle. And once again, that goes to show how constrained or restrained these cops are. When they know that some of their fellow officers are dying or getting injured right there, falling right beside them, that they don't automatically take out their gun and shoot the nearest person. It's amazing. But I'm thinking that this shooter wanted some of the protesters to be killed by the police. Keep in mind, that shooter didn't hit any of the protesters except for that one woman who was trying to protect her son. All the injured except for one woman were police officers. But I go back to the shooter himself and what was in his mind. And all of this, all of these shootings, we go back, there was, last year, the year before, where there's two NYPD cops were sitting in their car, and they were shot execution style, surprised. And there's been other few situations in the past few years. And in fact, there was maybe a year ago that the police departments across the United States were worried about the app Waze, which is a map app for driving places. It's kind of like a more complex, better version of Google Maps if you're driving somewhere. And it actually charts out where the police are, because people, as they use the app, they're going down the street. If they see a cop, like with a radar gun, they'll go into the app and say, hey, there's a policeman here. The police departments across the United States say that Waze, W-A-Z-E, is a way for people who hate cops to kind of see where they are and stalk them. But in the end, this guy was shooting these cops for no reason. This is the danger. See, this is the danger of, can I say this? Taking free speech too far. Remember, we have free speech, but we don't necessarily have free speech. It goes back to Oliver Wendell Holmes with, you have free speech, but you certainly cannot shout fire in a crowded theater, causing panic, pandemonium, a stampede where people get killed. However, on the other hand, if there is a fire in a theater, yes, it's probably best to yell it. It all depends on the circumstances. But if there's no fire, you certainly don't have a right to say that. But what's going on now with Black Lives Matter, black militant groups, and anybody who wants to feed off these groups is that they are yelling fire in a crowded theater where there's no fire. Now, there may be some smoke. They may have put their hand up against a wall and it felt a little warm, right? You can think of to continue the analogy, where somebody might suspect that there's a fire going on, see smoke, smell smoke, feel the floor, feel a wall, feels a little hot. But in those cases, you just want to tell your fellow people, hey, you know what, I think I smell smoke. Does anybody else smell smoke? And they say, hey, yeah, we got to get out of here. But you don't run, you don't stampede. But what these people have done, Black Lives Matter and the rest of them, is they've gone right to, there's a fire. That all over the United States, cops are killing black people for no reason. The statistics don't bear that out. They just don't. As I was listening to some show this weekend while I was over in Orlando, or in Daytona Beach, might have been on Saturday morning, Sunday morning. The statistics are that white people get shot twice as much as black people. Now, it should be known that there are a lot more white people than black people in the United States. White people make up what? We still make up 66% of the population. Maybe not the 60%. Blacks make up 12%. So it should be that whites get shot 5 times as much as blacks, but it's only double that. But still, you don't see any white people out there protesting cops shooting white people. And I'm going to guess, for various reasons, either on purpose, there's some bad cops out there, and by accident, that there maybe should be some white peoples that have a beef. But with black people and minorities, just all minorities, it has been so grossly misrepresented as to what's going on that now 5 cops are dead for a lie. Remember, hands up, don't shoot is a lie. I want to remind you of that. They were yelling. Did you hear them chanting that at the protest on last Thursday? Did you hear it in those recordings? It's a lie. Those protesters are there for a lie. I'm not saying that any one of these shootings where a man or a woman didn't need to be shot is bad. To say it is an epidemic to the point where it's outraging people and putting cops at risk is a lie. And no matter how well-meaning these protesters were at this peaceful gathering that happened in Dallas, the problem is that they are there because of a lie. I want to continue to talk about this after the break. You've been listening to the Dentzel Domain on Red State Talk Radio.
The voice of American conservatism. WRS Digital, Red State Talk Radio.
And we are back at the Dentzel Domain on Red State Talk Radio. I want to continue to talk about what happened last Thursday, July, that would have been 7th, with the police shooting. Well, it wasn't a police shooting. It was the terrorist. Can we call him a terrorist trying to terrorize people? Not a Islamic terrorist, at least not as far as we know yet. But it was terrorism. Murdering people to inflict terror, to cause a stampede, to maybe cause cops to start shooting the protesters instead of shooting at the killer who was perched in that parking garage. But I want to get back to the protesters themselves. And I'm sure that a lot of them show up there as well-meaning people. But you know how I think about all of this, is that I come to this microphone, I don't have any special knowledge. I don't have any insider info. I don't have connections in any police departments, and in the FBI in Washington, D.C., or in Texas, or here where I live in Florida, or where I used to live in Las Vegas. I don't have any special connections. I get the news like the rest of you do. And those people, those protesters, they have the ability to access the same amount of information that I do. Now, granted, maybe I have a little more time on my hands than they do, being that I do this show, and it's a responsibility of mine 5 days a week. But nobody can show up for a protest like that if they actually know what's going on. Do they have a right to protest peacefully? Yes. Do they have a right to protest peacefully because of a lie? I would guess so, yes. But when the protest comes together because of a lie, and then remember, this guy who was shooting, he is one of them. He's just a more violent version of those people who were walking the streets on Dallas that Thursday night. Remember that. That shooter had more in common with the protesters than he had with the cops. So let's not get too crazy in talking about how these people, they just wanted to have a peaceful protest, and then a shooting broke out. It was one of their own that ruined the protest. The police did not ruin it. But the problem is, these protesters, they went home on Thursday night thanking God that they're alive, but I'm sure none of them put that all together. None of them. That what was in that guy's mind was that cops are killing black people. Too many of them are doing it for no reason. And that the protesters, that's why they're there. They think the exact same thing. All that guy did, that shooter did, was take it to the next step. But they're all believing in a lie. And believing in lies gets innocent people killed, whether they are cops or not. You don't hear that talked about, though. Once again, I'm going to remind you, hands up, don't shoot, that comes from the Ferguson, Missouri incident from, 2014, was it? Is a lie. Hands up, don't shoot. Never happened. The truth is, that guy went for the cop's gun and the cop had to shoot him. That's what happened. He was not walking toward the cop with his hands up, and the cop shot him anyway. I remind you all of that. But those protesters, try telling them that. Those Dallas people who were so happy to get out of there alive on Thursday night, you try telling them that, suddenly they go from peaceful protester to kook in a matter of seconds when you say that. Even though they have the same exact information, access to the information that I do. So let's not all pretty this up. Let's not. Now, where's this all going to go? You know, there was even, what was it, yesterday or the day before, there was a lockdown at the police department in Dallas. Going to be rumors flying all over the place. And I wonder how many people they're going to find out kind of knew that this guy was a little tweaked in the head, hated cops. I wonder how many they're probably going to find out quite a few. And you know what? All of those people are probably going to believe in hands up, don't shoot as well. And they're also going to believe in Black Lives Matter as some peaceful group, which it's not. Just like we found out with Orlando, at least the guy's wife knew that he wanted to go do this. Never said a word. Just like in San Bernardino, once again, a militant Islam shooting. Just like the neighbors kind of suspected, something's going on down the street, but they didn't want to say anything because they didn't want to be called racists. And what you start figuring out is that these things are all preventable, but people don't speak up for lots of reasons, none of which has to do with anything regarding law in the United States. They're either fearful that they're going to be called a racist, or on the other hand, maybe they will actually kind of, sort of do want it to happen. But they can always say after the fact, well, I didn't know he was really going to do it. He didn't have any weapons or anything in there that were illegal. What do you want me to do? But in the back of their heads, they're kind of thinking, yeah, those cops, they're horrible. They're killing innocent black people. They deserve to be shot. And I wonder of those protesters walking down the streets, although they were running for their lives, I'm wondering today what percentage of them actually like that the cops got shot. Because you know what? It is their ideas that got those cops shot. Those cops were shot over a lie, I remind you once again. Just like Muslims. We brought this up before. Muslims that know radical Muslims within their own groups, and they themselves would never go blow themselves up anywhere. For whatever reason. But they're willing to cover up that one of their fellow Muslims is thinking about doing something, and they don't want to tell the Christian cops or the Jewish cops or the atheist cops or any other religion's authority. It's all the same thing. But I wonder what they're going to decide with this guy. As I've said, and I'm, once again, not excusing him. What he did was wrong. He had all the bad thoughts in his head, brought upon by lies upon lies upon lies about law enforcement. And as you know, if you've listened to the show, at least for the last 2 years that I've been on Red State Talk Radio, I have complaints about the cops as well. And if you don't know, I'm a white guy. I'm an Irish Catholic white guy, which means you can't get much whiter than that. I've had a couple run-ins with cops in my life, not recently. It mainly goes back to really, I guess, my younger days. Not even when I was in Las Vegas. I had no issues there. I got pulled over for driving too slow once by a state cop who was obviously, and there's proof, one of my best friends to this day was with me at the time when it happened. And it was, hey, however, do I think that state cop who pulled me over was indicative of the entire Pennsylvania State Police Force? No. Guy, maybe he's just an idiot in general. Maybe he's having a bad night. Maybe he's getting divorced. Maybe he found out that his wife's cheating on him. Maybe he found out that an investment of his just went to zero. Maybe his son or daughter's in the hospital. There's a whole host of reasons that he could have treated me like he did that night. Going back, I'm going to say that was either 1991 or 92, something like that. The problem you have here is that we have a couple shootings among all of the pullovers that happened in the United States from day to day, from speeding to broken taillights or everything in between. I mean, it has to be in the thousands, right? And you pick out a couple of them and you start thinking that's the way all cops are and that there is an epidemic. And there's not. Now, if you were telling me that 100 people were getting pulled over and shot, that would be two murders per state, 2 killings per state. That I think it's daily. I would start thinking, yeah, that's really, really weird. But that's not what's going on. A speeding ticket devolves into a shooting. A broken taillight devolves into a shooting. An unregistered automobile devolves into a shooting. Going through a red light devolves into a shooting. Now, if you're telling me that, I'll listen, but I don't believe that's going on. But they've taken a few instances and created an epidemic. And it's not. So the protests are there for the wrong reasons. The shooter is there for the wrong reasons. And if they're not there, or if at least the protesters aren't there, then the cops aren't there. They're out elsewhere trying to stop real crime going on. And all this is yelling fire in a crowded theater where no fire exists. There's not one flame showing. Not one flame. But they'll get away with it. They're going to get away with it again. I am sure that there will be more anti-cop, cops stop shooting innocent black people protests. This shooting, what happened here, is not going to stop anything. Now, I would say, though, on the other hand, that the police are probably going to take a look at what happened there and try to revise their tactics for providing security for these protests. I'm going to guess that they're going to start putting people up in buildings around the protest route, the parade route. Or is it route? That's probably one of the things they're going to do. And are the cops maybe a little bit too exposed, standing right out there on the street, just hanging out, and maybe just stand up on the sidewalk, maybe stand among the people or something like that. I'm sure that there's going to be some change in tactics regarding this, at least in the short term. So it's horrible. What'd they say? Well, I mean, it doesn't matter what was going on in any of these policemen's lives, whether one of them got married 2 weeks ago. Does it matter? All of their deaths suck. It's all horrible, whether they were single and had no kids or just got married and had 10 kids. It's all horrible, and it's always weird to me when that kind of bio is added to these people. And it's just a tragedy that he just got married 2 weeks ago. No, the tragedy is that he's dead. It's an inconvenience that he was married 2 weeks ago. And I know that bride, that woman, is probably never going to recover from that. But would it be different had the cop been married 20 years or was just single and just had a girlfriend? Would it matter? See, I think these are the types of things that drive me nuts. And you know I don't talk about the media a lot on this show, much less than other conservatives do. But these are the things that drive me nuts. These adding to the bios as if it makes it worse. It doesn't get any worse than being shot on duty when you're trying to protect a bunch of people who you hate. Or who hate you, I should say. And let's point out something else, being that I brought that up now, and I tweeted this out on Thursday night. What percentage... This is a good question. I want you to think about this. What percentage of those protesters, when they first heard the first gunshots, thought the police were firing at them? Remember, they're there. They're there because of what the police are doing, shooting people. And so wouldn't the natural next inclination to think when you hear gunshots and a bunch of police are standing around that the police are just shooting the protesters for no reason? I mean, that is the reason that they're there, because they believe the cops shoot people for no reason. Then it shouldn't be a stretch that they thought, hey, they're going to shoot me for no reason now too. I bet it was a decently high percentage that when they heard those gunshots, thought it was the police shooting them. Because that's why they're there. Now, it would be interesting, and these are the way my mind goes, is if you could track down some of these protesters. What did you think when you first heard those shots? Well, I thought it was some terrorist or something shoot. And I as soon as they'd say that, I said, why didn't you think it was the cops? And they'd say, what do you mean? And I would say, well, you're here because you believe the cops shoot innocent people, right? And they'd say, yes. And I said, you're an innocent person, aren't you? And they'd say, yes. And I'd say, and you were surrounded by cops. And they'd say, yes. And so, exactly, but you just said you believe that cops shoot innocent people. Then why wouldn't those cops shoot you? Why wasn't that your first inclination? You're the one that took time out of your evening to come down here and talk about how cops shoot innocent people, but that's not what you thought of when you heard shots ring out. So why are you here? See how I did that? But I bet a lot of them did think that it was the police shooting them, just for whatever reason. But for the ones who weren't thinking that, I'd want to know why. And see, this is the problem you get into. You can see this with Donald Trump. You can see this with all sorts of different political situations where you start to believe in lies, and then people start asking you tough questions. And suddenly you end up talking yourself into a pretzel. No different than conservatives talking about Donald Trump and how they support Donald Trump. Same thing. I just wonder if they believe it or not. You hear about these. I don't know any of these protesters that were there in Dallas. I just wonder what's going through their heads. Obviously nothing good. So, I know it's been 4 days, but since I didn't get to do a show on Friday, had to do it now. But let's move on to one or two more things before I have to leave you for tonight. There's news out there that surfaced this weekend, and this shouldn't be a surprise to any of you. I've been telling this to this friend of mine and other people and I've mentioned it here on the show too, that I haven't even qualified this. I've just come out and say there is no way that Donald Trump picks a conservative to be his running mate. And what do you know? This weekend, what's come out? He has General Michael Flynn, who is no conservative. He's totally pro-choice among other issues. Another choice that is picked up, for some reason, Donald Trump is looking at generals, and maybe that shouldn't be a surprise given how some of us think about Donald Trump and power. He's looking at General Stanley McChrystal, who is no conservative either. And I think some other names have been mentioned. And this might be enough. And then over the weekend, the talk has been that if Donald Trump goes off the reservation and picks some Democrat to be the vice president, his vice president, that would push enough Republicans over the edge, as if everything he did to this point wasn't enough. This is what happened. What it goes back to, remember that show I did about a month ago, maybe longer than that ago, about Stevie Wonder's song Superstition? When you believe in things that you don't understand, then you suffer. And that's what a lot of you, I think, are going to be going through with this. You're going to suffer. I'm not suffering because I've been right about this since day one. Donald Trump is not a conservative. He doesn't like conservatives. They are just a tool for him to get what he wants. He is a man of no principles, which means he is a liberal. He looks in things in terms of ruling and power, not of freedom and liberty. That's a problem. That you conservatives continue to look past that just because you want to beat Hillary Clinton, that's on you. That's not Donald Trump. Donald Trump is, at least one thing I will not blame him for, he's just being himself. That you accept him the way he is your fault. All right, remember that. Nobody's forcing you to support him. Nobody's going to force you to vote for him. That's going to be on you. And when he picks a Democrat nominee, what are you going to do? Are you going to continue to believe in things that you don't understand? You believe in Donald Trump, although it doesn't seem that you understand him. It's no surprise to me. I never, at least on the Republican side, on the conservative side, have so many good people, otherwise smart people, got behind somebody who is so obviously flawed and wrong and bad for not just the party, but for the United States. He's just a female version of Hillary Clinton. That's it. What do I always like to point out? Do we really believe that Donald Trump would own up to anything? If he had been the Secretary of State when Benghazi happened, what do you think he would do? Don't you think that he would have applied the same tactics that Hillary Clinton has for the last almost 4 years? When asked about Benghazi, would he have not just said, "Will you make mistakes too? Can't we just get past this?" Would he not try to, the senator or congressman or congresswoman questioning about Benghazi, would not Donald Trump start saying, "Hey, wasn't your father or mother conspirator to kill," and being that JFK has been used so much, Robert F. Kennedy? Or Martin Luther King Jr.? That's how Donald Trump would respond to it. In fact, his responses, if he were in charge of Benghazi at the time as Secretary of State, would be even more outrageous than what Hillary Clinton has been saying for almost the last 4 years. But you people support him, you keep doing so. Keep believing in things you don't understand. But I got to go. You can go to edwarddentzel.com where you can find all of my old Red State Talk Radio shows. You can find them also at YouTube, Podbean, Podomatic, and SoundCloud. Email me, edwarddentzel@reagan.com. Follow me on Twitter, Dentzel Domain. You can go to Facebook and find me, LinkedIn and find me. I've told you about my new show, or my other show, which is kind of new, called America's Missing Podcast with my co-host Melissa Bridges. We're going to be recording another new show later in the day. Looking forward to that. That show's very hot. You should be listening. And you can find that on iTunes and Podomatic. And it's been a pleasure talking to you tonight. Tonight, you've been listening to the Dentzel Domain on Red State Talk Radio.